Disgaea 2. This is how you make a sequel, ladies and gentlemen. You take everything that was great about the original, you amplify it, and you fix what few flaws the original had. But I don't think anybody ever really expected the kind of direction that this game would take. Released 3 years after the original Disgaea, Disgaea 2 was sort of a touch-and-go thing for a while. It wasn't really known whether or not there would even be a sequel due to the poor to average sales of the original and the fact that it only really started gaining popularity after the initial sales of it were closed. But lucky for us, Nippon Ichi Software saw that they had a potential hit on their hands and dragged out a sequel. Now, while the initial gameplay of this game remains the same as the first game, there were a vast majority of improvements made, but there were also a lot of differences as well, the most obvious of which being the story and the characters. The first and most obvious change is the fact that Laharl is not the main character of this story. In fact, Laharl barely appears in this game at all, and is relegated to a bonus character that you can unlock, and a very small cameo in the main plot. This actually doesn't even take place in the same netherworld. It takes place on a different world called Veldheim that has been transformed into a netherworld by an evil overlord named Xenon, known as the god of all overlords. Instead, our main character this time is a young human named Adele, who was the only person to remain human after Xenon's curse started turning people into monsters and started robbing them of their memories and their consciences. Because of this, he believes he is the only one who can defeat Overlord Xenon, and so his family helps him to prepare a summoning ritual in order to summon Xenon so that he can defeat him.
Oh, ho, 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 shut up, brat. Mommy still wants to be human again.
Yeah, she claims it was because the curse stole her conscience, but this mother really is not the motherly type. Anyway, for a reason unknown to them, the summoning ritual goes awry, and they end up summoning Overlord Xenon's daughter, Rosalind, instead. And yes, she is the one and only daughter of Overlord Xenon, and she loves to remind us of this fact constantly.
For I am Rosalind, the one and only daughter of Overlord Xenon. I am the daughter of Overlord Xenon! Such a violent act shall not be forgiven! My father and I are bound by strong family ties.
Oh yeah, and she also likes to do a whole lot of whining.
Ignorant brute! Inviting a lady to eat in a place like this is simply inappropriate! Don't you have any manners?
So, while neither of these characters are really happy with the arrangement that they've been forced into, Rosalind is forced due to the terms of the summoning contract to help Adele find her father so he can fight him. But meanwhile, Rosalind schemes to have him killed before then so that she can be released from her duties as a summon. And from there the plot gets so twisty-turny that I can't really discuss it without fear of spoilers. But suffice it to say that there is a much more serious undertone running through the entirety of the game than there was the first one. It's still a very funny game, don't get me wrong, and full of some hilarious characters and jokes. But compared to the first one, it's taking itself much more seriously. And nowhere is that more evident than in our two main leads, Adele and Rosalind. Adele is your standard upstanding hero. He's the type of character who hates unfair fights, always believes in doing the right thing, and never tells a lie. He's basically as cliché as it can get, and while he does develop a little bit over the course of the series, it's not a very deep development. Basically, his perceptions of Rosalind and other demons are what changes, not him himself. It also gets quite annoying listening to him chime about his style, or the way that he does things all the time. It actually gets so ridiculous that a lot of the other characters lampoon his upstanding nature, or his apparent lust for combat.
You can't give up now! What about all that fair fight nonsense?
Now, Rosalind is actually a much more interesting character because she is the one who develops the most over the course of the game, starting out as the sheltered, bratty princess and becoming a relatively caring, upstanding citizen herself by the end of the game. She also has one of the most tragic backstories of the entire Disgaea mythos, which once again lends a lot to the serious undertones of the game. I will say that these two characters do have some of the best banter in the entire series. It's actually pretty interesting to see them talk back and forth and bounce off of each other. They do have good chemistry as characters, but that may only be because this is such a tried and tested pairing. I mean, the sheltered girl going with the upstart hero and having them clash.
A better reason? Such as being from a heroic lineage, or being level 100 million? Normal people usually have, you know, real reasons to believe they can defeat their enemies.
Of course, there are a lot of other characters aside from these two, such as Adele's family, but a majority of them are played either for exposition or comedy, such as Yukimaru, the ninja girl who is trying to avenge her clan, Zam. And then there's Tink, Rosalind's childhood friend, who also happens to be a schizophrenic frog with a French accent. Yeah.
You, stay right there! It is 2,000 spankings for you!
And then of course there is the character that everybody was looking forward to seeing again in this game. A character who has a huge fan following ever since her appearance in the first, Etna. Etna could basically be described as a wild card in this game. In keeping with her character from the original Disgaea, she's not really a good person, and she's only really interested in a situation if it will better her current situation. And she's still willing to do whatever she has to get what she wants, be it blackmail, bribery, or murder. Still, it's her specific brand of chaos that actually causes the plot to move forward more often than not. Though I do have to admit, I find it kind of strange that in this game, she's not really so much a plotter as she is a straight-up psychopath. Much like the first game did with the character of Vyers, this game also gives you a rival that pesters you throughout the entire game. This one is Axel, the Dark Hero. He is probably the silliest character in this entire game, next to Tink, of course. His entire personality is that he's a completely washed-up celebrity, but he absolutely refuses to accept the fact that he's a has-been, and instead is constantly trying to think of different ways to get back into the limelight. It just so happens that most of his plans include trying to beat you to a pulp. Moving away from the story and the characters, finally, how does the gameplay stack up? I've basically already said that the initial gameplay is pretty much all the same, but everything's been improved, from the geo panels having more effects, to being able to attack while you're lifting somebody, to just being able to reassign a character a different action if they weren't able to perform a former action during that turn. But with all that in mind, let's take a look at some of the big changes that were made. First off, the main issue that I had with the original game, what with the classes being horrendously unbalanced, is almost completely fixed here. Almost every class is viably usable in this game because, while some classes still have very high aptitudes compared to others, they also have special abilities, which also help them to equal out. For example, thieves are the only characters who can get more than a 50% steal chance when using a hand item. Spirits will regain magic points each turn, treants will regain hit points each turn, and so on and so forth. So even if the character has high aptitudes, they usually have low movement, throwing ability, or a completely useless special skill to help balance things out. The Dark Assembly and Item World have also been given huge revamps in this game. The Dark Assembly has actually made it much easier in this game to pass bills than it was in the first game. All of the senators are broken up into different political parties now, and so whatever you do to please one party will displease their opposites. And so you have to plan ahead a little bit on who you want to bribe, chloroform, or knock out. The Item World, on the other hand, has also received quite a makeover, and is also much more useful in this game. Yes, I know in the first game it was basically used to train your characters, but you really did not have to go there, especially when you started unlocking like the Cave of Ordeals maps. But here, the item world is much more useful because of the court system. Every now and then you'll receive a subpoena for committing a crime. These crimes usually contend of something such as getting too high hit points, existing, or playing the game for too many hours at a time. And by accessing these subpoenas, you can go to the Dark Court in the item world. And by doing so, you can amass felonies. Every felony adds a 1% increase to your character's experience gain, so it is really worth it to try throwing as many characters as you can into the subpoena zone to get as many felonies as possible. However, you do have to be careful about this because if a certain character amasses too many felonies, it will affect the ending.